Today, we're going to ask a question almost no one in property likes to touch. Not will house prices keep rising, but how expensive do we actually want housing to be? For decades, we've celebrated rising house prices around Australia. If your home was worth more than it was last year, life felt a bit easier. It's the wealth effect, isn't it? Having said that, politicians were happy, banks were happy, homeowners were happy. But after 50 years of almost uninterrupted price growth, sure, we've had the ups and downs, but the long-term trend's up. We need to ask a harder question. Is it actually good for us if house prices keep getting more expensive? And the answer, of course, depends on who you are, because rising house prices has created a lot of winners in Australia: homeowners, investors, banks, governments, tradies, retailers. But it's also created a growing group of losers, people who are renting, younger Australians, essential workers, small businesses, and maybe even the future of the middle class. So welcome to today's episode of Demographics Decoded, the show that unveils the trends shaping our future. Hi, I'm Michael Yardney, and I'm joined each week by leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher, and together we dig deep beneath the data to uncover the trends that are shaping our economy, our communities, and our future prosperity, and what that means for you and your business and your investments, in fact, for your own personal prosperity. Our aim is to help make sense of what's coming next. What you can, I guess, aim is to allow you to make smarter decisions for your business, for your investments, for your life. So today, we're going to talk about the trend shaping your future, about house prices. Let's see who really benefits from higher prices, who pays the long-term cost, and what it means for you as a property investor. Simon, you recently wrote an article, a column in the New Daily about this.
Yeah, and I was it started with the idea that in the newspapers and even TV and so forth, you constantly hear about property prices spoken in one direction. So we say when prices fall, we say prices fall. And then when they go up, we say they recovered. So it's a positive language when prices go up. So ultimately, it assumes that the majority of people want this house price number to go up rather than down. And then you go, that makes sense. If you own an asset, you want the price of this asset to go up rather than down. That makes perfect sense. But then I figured, well, who actually wants housing to go up and who wants housing to go down? And if you see all those different powers weighing against each other, you can kind of understand that certain kind of narratives about housing affordability, and you wonder, why are we talking about housing affordability and things aren't getting more affordable? And then you think, well, you stack up the interest to want housing to be more expensive. They probably in the end are more powerful than the interests that want housing to be less expensive.
Interesting. So you made a long list of winners and losers in your column, and that's not behind a paywall. So I'll leave a link in the show notes so people can read it in the New Daily. But most Australians instinctively cheer when house prices go up, especially if they own a property. So maybe we could just walk through the list of winners first and then the losers. And I guess, who are the winners? Let's start with those.
Yeah, so the winners if house prices go up are the people who are cheering for high house prices. So these would be homeowners, property investors. Obviously, we mentioned them. They want their price of the asset to go up. Mortgage lenders, banks, they think it's cool if they give out bigger and longer mortgages. That's how they make most of their money. Some banks have 50% of their money through home loans. So that is good for them. Real estate agents, they like that. State governments, they collect about 50 to 60% of all of their revenue through property related taxes. They like that. The federal government is increasingly a fan of that. Politically speaking, they know that higher house prices win votes. And of course, now the federal government literally is invested into the housing market through the 5% home loan guarantee. So if you are guaranteeing home loans, you don't want them to go down and then be on the hook for these kind of things.
Simon, there's another new system just started also where the government will take equity in your home. So they're even deeper invested, owning up to 30, sometimes 40% of equity together with first home buyers.
Exactly. So the government is now not just a regulator of the housing market, they're also an investor of the housing market. So they increasingly would want this stuff, the house price value to go up rather than down. Then, of course, you have super funds. And of course, self-managed super funds are included in this argument. They own property-related indexes or real property to begin with. And so they go, well, of course, they want this to go up. And so therefore, in a sense, everyone who has a super account, to at least to a small degree, wants property to go up. Tradies, architects, builders, those guys benefit when house prices go up, when people feel wealthier when they then want to invest more into the house. That's good for them. We think about hardware, homeware, retailers. It's the richer you feel, the more likely you are to buy the fancy Danish tapware rather than the cheap knockoff Chinese version. So those people make higher sales. And then you have whole niche industries, property photographers, stylists, marketing firms. They benefit from this. Financial planners, if you the bigger property portfolio you manage, there's an industry around that. Then you have, to a degree, you could argue, but they're winners and losers at the same time. Retailers, luxury type retailers, they benefit if people feel richer. And we know that if we feel richer, we buy more stuff. And if your house doubles in value, you feel richer, so you buy more stuff, even though your income hasn't changed. Your local councils, they are linked to higher valuations. They should lift the rates that they can draw from. The bank of mom and dad, so households that are rich enough to act as a bank of mom and dad benefit from this in a relative sense, that they're able to enter the property market while other people can't. Then you have a whole media industry around property. They benefit from higher rather than lower properties, I would argue as well.
The list goes on and
The
on,
list goes
doesn't
on.
it?
So this is the whole point: is you see all those properties linked to its self-storage providers and so forth, foreign property investors as well. There's a big, strong, powerful system that utilizes the Australian housing system that is very much geared towards prices going up rather than down. And so lots of people understood this, and they attached a big chunk of their investment to this system, and they did well if they'd done so over the past decades. So they stand as one big force wanting to drive prices up. They're probably the vast majority in numerical terms, of the Australian people, but they're not the sole force, if you will.
Interestingly, at the end of last year, Cotality came up with the figure that the Australian residential real estate market is worth over $12 trillion. I remember before COVID when we got excited when it got to $9 trillion. Now, sure, there's debt against that, but interestingly, the total debt against residential real estate is about $2.4 trillion. So there's a lot of people who own their home with no debt or with minimal debt because they bought it 10, 15 years ago. And this wealth effect, the concept that people feel richer on paper, gets them to borrow more, to spend more. How important has that been for the Australian economy, Simon?
It's a real effect, and it helps retail. It helps retail spending. It's part of the story why we remain a high consumption society. It is that we feel we have the capacity to do so. And it's quite fun when you compare retail spending behavior in Australia with other countries. We are much slower than other nations when economic downturns occur to actually also curb our spending, our dining out and so forth. These things slow down in Australia much slower than in other places. I would argue this has to do with us being a lifestyle obsessed culture. And of course, with us having been increasingly used to this kind of consumer behavior.
Now, I know a lot of listeners to this show are property investors as well. They are small business people providing accommodation for people who require it. They've seen the compounding growth. They've used their equity as a financial tool to give them some financial freedom. What do you say to them who are listening to this conversation who might start to feel a little bit defensive about this?
Yeah, so in a sense, investors have been a big fat winner of this. So if you invest into a thing and the system within this thing is operating is geared towards driving the value of this thing up, you've done well. So you want to pick an investment like this. If we were to tell you in this podcast every week that the housing market is going down because all of the policies are driving house prices down, then you would potentially be well advised to invest into stocks or bonds or something else. But we're not telling you this. My view remains that the house prices or the system want house prices to go up and therefore bet on higher rather than lower house prices. So yeah, and in a sense, you feel defensive, so be it. But you made a numerical decision in a
Well, they've
market.
taken a financial risk and they're getting the rewards.
Exactly, and that always remains to be important. Important minded. Whatever investment you do, you can never ever be fully certain that it actually pays off. Every investment is linked to a risk, and some investments have lower risks than others.
Sure. So we've made a long list of those who of one from house prices. Let's have a look at those who are the losers to see how that plans out.
Well, first and foremost, it's first home buyers, it's renters. So
First
these are
home
the people.
buyers.
First home buyers. So the idea is that you need longer to save for a home, therefore you rent longer, therefore you accrue less wealth. This isn't working for you. It would also be key workers, low income employees. For them, the ever increasing house prices means it's out of reach. So if you're a low income worker, it's tough to see how you will own a family house ever.
Or at least in the locations where you want to live, Simon, close to the hospitals or the fire station where you work or the police station where you work, which is often in the middle ring suburbs.
Exactly. But if I look at a couple where, let's say, both people are aged care workers, these are low income jobs, definitely needed, massively important jobs. These facilities that they need to commute to, they're not absolutely in the cheapest areas. And where do you find housing? It is hard to pull this off for those people. Maybe you can make it work with an awful lot of strategizing. You can make it work, but there's quite a big chunk of jobs where I don't see it happening, to be honest. A home ownership. Obviously, those people are not happy with this. Then you'd have younger generations, as I said. So you could also say that to a degree, federal and state governments don't want house prices to go up, even though they benefit from house prices financially. They also know that if house prices go up, they need to fork out more money for rent assistance, for social housing, for services that are linked to increasing poverty, that it actually is expensive as well. So they need to weigh those interests off against each other. And then you have charity organizations that help people in financial distress. This should, they have more to do, which they don't want to if house prices go up. We know that stuff like foster care, the number of foster kids increase when house prices go up, but the number of families able to look after foster kids goes down. So that's really bad for the foster care system. Mental health services tend to see more rather than less demand if house prices escalate. Affordable housing developers, well, it's hard for them to pull this off because land is so expensive. How do you make this stack up? Housing is a low margin industry. Um, yeah, so I would also view as one big loser, I would look insurance firms. So if I'm insuring a house, a basic house, and this house is worth $1 million instead of $500,000 and it burns down, I need to replace this big fat asset. Yes, it has been insured. I'm factoring this into my calculations, but replacing whole cities after a swamp, after a flooding or fire event is very, very expensive.
Yes. Yes.
Also, of course, in Australia, we always wonder why our stock market is undercapitalized. Why are not enough financial resources flowing into the stock market so that the companies can use this money to be innovative and, attack the international markets? That's because if you have spare cash, the property market is probably a better investment. And so the attractive property market steals a bit of money away and so forth. Yeah. So there is enough people who lose from this. I'd say overall the existence of the middle class is at risk. Yeah, because middle class wealth, how do you create this? Part of this was homeownership. And if you don't have fewer young people entering the middle class through homeownership and so forth, you're changing the social structure of Australia quite significantly. And that does have an impact as well.
Well, that really concerns me. So be very transparent. I'm a successful property investor. I own substantial property. Our team at Metropole help clients grow their wealth through strategic property advice. We manage over $2 billion worth of assets for clients managing their investment properties. But having said that, despite that, I'm concerned about something you wrote about and we've spoken about before, the risk of splitting us into two Australians, an asset-rich class and an asset-poor class. I don't like seeing that at all, but because it seems like, again, with the bank of mum and dad helping people, intergenerational wealth being transferred even before baby boomers die, it is becoming in some ways a country of haves and have-nots. Now, Simon, before I let you answer that question, if you're interested in this concept, Simon and I have discussed it in many previous episodes of Demographics Decoded. So each show is a message on its own about the demographic changes shaping our future. If you don't currently subscribe or follow, click the button, whatever it says on the podcast app or viewer you're watching this on, and go back and listen to some of those shows where we talk about this wealth tsunami that's coming, the great transfer of wealth. But Before I started giving that shameless plug for our show, Simon, I was mentioning my concern about the disappearing middle class. That's not good for Australia.
No, it very much changes our perception of who we are. We still view ourselves as a middle class society. We think that we more or less are all in the same boat and that everyone gets a fair go, for example. But this assumes this bell curve environment where you have most people in the middle, a couple of people on the rich and the poor side. But the reality is that we are shifting into a U-shaped society where we have a shrinking middle class in the middle and we have big chunks of rich and poor people on either side. And yes, our poor people are much richer than the poor people in, let's say, South Africa or Brazil. And that is good for us. And that is very, very good news. But we still divide society, and the middle class should be amped up. The bizarre thing to wish for, of course, is at the moment, the middle class, the small remaining bastion of middle class that is still available, is doing really well because they are dominated by tradies. And we created this outrageous shortage of tradies over the last decades so that these people that we didn't create enough tradies and the people that somehow ended up becoming tradies, they did really well. A plumber, a carpenter, a brickie, they can charge really good daily rates at the moment, in a sense, more than they should. That's not, I don't want to be mean towards these workers, but the system would actually like if the labor costs for these services were much cheaper so that you can drive down construction costs a bit more. That would be welcome at the moment. But then again, that drives up house prices, which further increases the shift into a U-shaped society. It's a really hard nut to crack, the reestablishment of the middle class. And so far, we haven't even made it a deliberate national policy goal where we'd say our goal is to reestablish a strong middle class. We don't have that goal because so far every policy tells me we don't want this to be the case.
That was one of the things that came out of your article for me, Simon. You emphasized, and I'll leave a link in the show notes to the new daily article, as I said, that the system is designed for rising house prices. One of the words or the sentences that you wrote that stood out for me was that house prices are not an act of God, they're a result of political choices. So what are the levers governments can actually pull?
Well, so if you wanted to make housing more affordable, as a thought experiment, say you want to drive house prices down, you could do this. You could kill off stamp duty tomorrow if you wanted to and introduce a land tax. That would make housing cheaper at the point of purchase. That is guaranteed. You should cut off first home buyer grants, programs like Super for Housing, 5 loan home loan guarantee. These things are guaranteed to make housing cheaper. But that seems politically extremely hard to pull off. So I'm not quite sure how to get this through politically. But there's one thing that, when somebody like me or when the Grattan Institute talks about things that could be done to drive down house prices, in a sense, you do all this hard work, intellectually speaking, and then you have to laugh about it and say, like, well, it's all pointless. If the system wants housing to be more expensive, these policies will be ignored anyways.
Well, as you say, there's a vested interest. I've heard people describe the money flowing in from property to all levels of government, local, state and federal, as a form of cocaine that they've become addicted to keep their budgets positive.
Exactly, because if you think about then, if you wanted to drive house prices down, then quite a few systemic players are short of cash. So they would then need to introduce some sort of other funding source, and that would be a new tax. And any kind of new tax is always very, very unpopular, which is why every politician likes to talk about tax cuts because somebody will be happy about it. But you still need a baseline of money in the budget to pay for all the stuff that you want to build or provide to your population. And so we would need a very honest political player in the system who actually says what they want to do, which would be theoretically to drive down house prices and then to redistribute this wealth in order to create a middle class. And so you could lay out a playbook, but this would need to be very, very transparent. And in order to make this even remotely a realistic scenario, you would have to have both major parties on board from the get-go. And I don't see this happening because politically speaking, the best thing you can do when one party talks about cutting house prices is to just shut up. And then the majority of voters will actually side with you. Bill Shorten learned that when he lost the unlosable election a couple of years ago, where he essentially said, I make your housing cheaper. And most people said, how about you don't? This is the biggest chunk of my wealth, my portfolio. So just don't do it. We'll just vote for the other guy. They didn't care who the other guy was. That doesn't matter because the other guy just said he's not, just shut up, yeah, and didn't need to talk about it.
Well, in previous chats and demographics decoded, you pointed out that the generational maths is changing. Younger renters are becoming a much bigger voting bloc. How might this show up over the future years?
Yeah, so that's my argument that so far, the people who are not homeowners, who are in the vast minority, they are, though, becoming a really sizable force among young people. So forth, or so far, that doesn't matter because they're still a minority. But with every election, we kill off 3 years worth of very, very high homeownership rate, and we introduce 3 more years of young people who have a much lower homeownership rate. And so if you push this through the system for long enough, and yes, people become homeowners if they get older, but it's still at a much lower rate than before. So at some point, the system can tip, and then the majority of people actually demand real housing actions. And then a party would be ill advised to not drive house prices down. But that's decades away. And this kind of demographic shift, I can see this maybe as soon as 18 to 21 years occurring, but not until then.
Until more baby boomers gently pass away.
That's part of the truth. Yeah.
It is. Simon, I want to spend a bit more time talking about, do we actually want house prices to fall and what we can do about it? But we've talked about talking to governments. I know you spend much of your day talking to institutions, to businesses, to companies. What's your job as a demographer? What do you do at the demographics?
Well, so we take all the data that we can get our hands of, and we try to read it and understand what this means for Australia. And so this very much includes population related data because that is the closest thing we have to a crystal ball. Our population forecasts in Australia are extremely precise, so we can make very targeted predictions about who's living where. We roughly know about their consumer, their spending behavior, and we can draw heaps of conclusions about this. And I try to just instill or combine all of this knowledge, and I'll tell it to an audience. This audience could be a consulting report, it could be a boardroom where we do strategic work at, or it could be a conference, a big event that I present at on stage.
Well, if you'd like Simon to present to your business, organization, institution, please contact him at the Demographics Group. There's a link in the show notes that'll tell you how to do that. And if you want to take advantage of our property markets, as 2026 is going to be another very strong year in property, why not have a chat with one of the wealth strategists at Metropole? We don't sell property, but we help our clients safely grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. And yes, we're one of Australia's largest buyers agents. At the end of last year, we won 3 awards as being Australia's best buyers agents, but we're much more than that. We'll help you plan to become the investor you plan to become, to get the financial choices you want. I'll leave a link to Metropole in the show notes. Why not have a strategic chat with one of our wealth strategists? Maybe we could turn for a second to now, Simon, talking about investing, because many investors instinctively say, I just want house prices to keep going up as much as possible. But I don't think that's the right answer. I often suggest that we like slower, sustained growth, not booms that trigger the next downturn or political backlash or the negativity at the moment. How does that stand from where you sit?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would want to see because let's say you're of the opinion that housing is much too expensive. And then you'd say, boy, it'd be awesome if there was a 30-40% fall by next Tuesday. If you think this through, such a rapid decline of house prices, this would be an absolute catastrophe for the country because we risk a bank toppling over in the process, for example, because they rely so heavily on mortgages. And you would have, lots of people's financial constructs falling apart. You don't want that either. So the best thing that you could plan for would be this slower strategic retreat where you say, we are pushing house price growth deliberately through policy below the level of wage growth. And then we make housing a itsy bitsy teeny bit more affordable each year for decades. And we make this a very well-known public policy so that people can act accordingly on the financial markets. That's what we want. Australia relies for its wealth on boring things like stability, on the fact that investors here know that usually things don't go down, don't bust, all that much. That's why people hedge and go to Australia for at least a small part of their investments. We don't want to rob ourselves of this advantage.
I agree with that. I see, though, this coming year, Simon, as a year where prices are going to keep increasing. Maybe not as much as they did in 2025, but 2026, I think, is probably going to be a year of two halves. I don't see interest rates falling again, well, anytime soon, or maybe we've even reached that neutral, comfortable level where interest rates are no longer stimulating the economy too much, but not dampening it either. But there's still a lot of pent-up demand. I see the first year as a time when all these new first home buyers, we've spoken about the first home buyers grant just a short while ago, giving people money to get into the market. It'll allow the next wave of first home buyers to get in, but make it more expensive for the cohort after them. I see a level of stability of interest rates giving home buyers and investors and sellers confidence they're getting in the market. There's FOMO. People are worried that they're missing out. And there's really just such a significant undersupply of property compared to demand. So vacancy rates are low, rents are going up, and so are property prices. I think eventually affordability is going to creep in, and the second half of the year probably won't grow as much as the first half of 2026. But overall, property values will still be up considerably in all capital cities and in major regional areas at the end of 2026. What you're talking about, I guess, is more long-term policy, some ideas. I can't see that changing, though, Simon.
No, not in the short term. So short to medium term would be if you say what's happening in the next 15 years or so, I don't see why prices should go down. In 15 years time, we have a bit of so if I'm talking to a 25-year-old today, or maybe let's make it a 20-year-old today, I could give them a bit of a sense of optimism because they will only need their family-sized home at age 35 in 15 years. That's when the baby boomers start dying at large scale. That's when all of a sudden all the baby boomer properties enter the market at the same time. We'll bulldoze the baby boomer homes in the middle suburbs. We'll build townhouses there, so the townhousification of the middle suburbs. That will then lead to, on average, lower house prices because we replace one family-sized home with 3 townhouses. That drives the average price of a 3-bedroom dwelling down. So that should have a positive impact on affordability as a whole. But before that, I don't see any major trend that drives prices down rather than up.
Having said that, it's never been easy. We've had discussions in previous shows about who's had it easier, baby boomers or the younger generation. If you're interested in that, wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching it, go back and have a look at some past shows. And by the way, if you don't subscribe to the show, please click the follow or subscribe button. And on Apple Podcasts, click the automatic download so you get our show each week. But I guess really what's happening is there are still opportunities for first home buyers. Don't be despondent. Yes, it is difficult, but last year alone, according to first homeowner loan approvals, there was over 110,000 new first home buyers coming to the market. I see there's going to be even more this year, Simon, with the first homeowner incentives. Just be careful, though, that you've got the serviceability and the financial discipline to take on those big loans.
Yes. So that doesn't. So when we say first home buying is hard, we mean it's hard. We does not mean it's impossible, and we mean that fewer people than in previous years will be able to buy a home in relation to the whole population. So that means first home buyer, people who buy a home at 25, that will go down. And the people who buy a home at age 30 will go down, and so forth. But ultimately, there'll still be heaps of people who manage to buy a house. There'll also be heaps of people who look at buying a house and go, that seems too high. And I can't do it. And I shouldn't, wouldn't it be better off to invest money elsewhere? So like, maybe if you know the right investments, but property wants to remain strong.
Yeah. So thanks, Simon. I think it was a good discussion, and clearly the list of those who are winning bigger than the list of those who are not at the moment. Let me pull a few threads together. If you're listening to this while you're out walking your dog, as I do when I listen to my podcast, or driving to work, and you're thinking, okay, Michael and Simon, what am I supposed to do with all of that? First of all, I want to openly acknowledge something. Most people who are listening to this are on the winning side of the current housing system. You already own a home or investment properties, and therefore you've probably benefited from years of price growth. You're probably feeling a mixture of gratitude and relief that you got in when you did. There's nothing wrong with that. You played the game that was in front of you. But I think what Simon's laid out today, and laid out well, is that the game has consequences that go beyond just our balance sheets. Rising house prices have made many of us wealthier on paper, but they've also made it harder for some young first home buyers, pushed some essential workers further away from where we want them, where we need them to be, forced many renters and low income households into housing stress because the cost of living is just too high for them. And it has increased the risk that one day there will be political backlash against investors and owners when we create such a chasm between those who own and those who don't own property. So I guess the one big idea to take away from this is the healthiest property market for serious long-term owners and investors is not necessarily the most expensive market possible. It's one where there's sustainable long-term property growth. So not the 20% double-digit growth that we occasionally get during booms, because that leads to the next downturn. But I basically see that it still will be the main way Australians are going to grow their wealth, either in their home or with investments. That's not going to change over the next couple of years, Simon.
No, I'd be utterly surprised if it did.
So play the long game, not the headline game. Don't worry about the news. Don't make 30-year investment decisions or home buying decisions on the last 30 minutes of news. If you can, get good advice. Go see a strategic mortgage broker who will make sure that you can borrow according to your limits and take advantage of the game that's put in front of you, Simon.
Absolutely. Yeah. Being strategic is such a wonderful advice because you want to do that. You don't want to be, blind and intuitive, but a bit of strategizing goes a long way.
Fantastic. Look forward to catching up with you again next week for our weekly Demographics Decoded show.
Fantastic. I'll catch you next week.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kirstenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.